good evening, everyone. We're going to get rolling. We weren't sure how many people were going to show up for this thing, because you never know. My name's Paul, and I'm part of the Family Services Collaborative Board, which is the entity that is sponsoring this event. And we are just a board that seeks to improve the lives and develop the well-being of at-risk children and families in St. Louis Park. So this is among the things we do. The other things that we do is we have basically a pool of money, which people like, that we give out as grants to various organizations and causes that people might have that fit our mission. And so we're like in that process right now of receiving grants. I think it's November 1st?
November 2nd.
November 2nd they're due. So if there's an organization you're partnered with, or maybe there's just something some kind of cause you've been trying to work in your own life, or whatever it is that might fit our mission, go ahead and fill out an application, because we like to give away money, and other people like to receive it. So you can do that by going to our website, which is, oh, I didn't write it down, slpfamilyservicescollaborative.org, right?
Yes.
Got it. You can also just Google that, and it'll probably come up. Thank God for the Google machine. But we're glad you're here tonight for this event. We have this panel of people here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, because they will do it better than I will. I also just wanted to quickly, if you're on the Family Services Collaborative Board, just raise your hand. People can see who we are. There we go. There's some of us here. We're not all here today. But this whole thing about vaping and everything was something we were talking about. We were trying to figure out what's some way we can bring the community together to talk about an issue that might be facing us. And this whole vaping thing came up, and the more we looked into it, the more we thought, this is an issue that's right before us. And I myself have 3 teenagers, and I knew nothing about it. And then Lisa's like, yeah, they're at the library. And I'm like, oh my God, my son goes to the library. Like, I'm like, hold on a second, I'm convinced my son is doing this, but I know nothing, and I've talked to him about it. And I just feel clueless, so I'm really grateful for you all, because I think there's always these things going on in our communities. Sometimes we parents and such are just in the dark about, and that's not our fault. That's nobody's fault. It's just the way the world works sometimes. So I think this will be a very beneficial evening for us. So with that, I am going to stop talking and telling you my life story, and hand it over to our panel. I can't remember who's going first.
Sure.
Is it on? Hi, I'm Jessica Bussey, and I am one of 2 assistant principals at the high school. So that's who I am.
Hi, I'm Kristen Engen-Routson. I am one of the social workers in the district. I'm also the chemical health specialist at the high school.
Hi, I'm Kim Olhafen. I actually work out of Minnetonka. I'm the director of Tonka Cares. We are a not-for-profit community coalition that, not dissimilar to yourselves, is based on healthy youth development through chemical health. And we subsequently have just sort of picked up the mental health issues too, because we see the ties to those. So recently that's been added to our curriculum. So we are a community coalition. We have a number of partners, physicians, social workers, high school, or rather just public school administration, and the recovery community. So we really just look at a variety of issues that plague our youth, and amongst those are vaping, e-cigarettes, and tobacco. So in the spring of last year, we did a community event not dissimilar to this at Minnetonka, because we were facing the same issues every other community is. A lot of this came out of the 2017 Minnesota Student Tobacco Survey data, which showed for the first time since its administration, which was 17 years ago, that youth smoking rates in the state of Minnesota had increased. So with that, I'm going to get started. I apologize in advance. We were going to have another speaker from ANSWER, which is the Association for Non-Smokers Minnesota. They're really at the forefront of changing policy around tobacco, vaping, e-cigarettes, and things like that in our community. And she brings a really great breadth of knowledge, but also a really cool goodie bag of all of the devices. And unfortunately, she had a medical emergency or issue, and so she is not able to join us. So I am going to go over her slides and do the best I can to explain anything that she would have covered. So that I will get started. So just the agenda really is talking about vaping, the harms, the risks, the trends in this community and just in the state of Minnesota. And then I'll go over some of the history of e-devices, public health concerns, what communities like St. Louis Park and surrounding areas are doing, and what more can be done. And then from the school standpoint, obviously, you'll have the ability to ask questions about what our social workers and counselors, chemical health counselors are seeing, and then from an administration standpoint, how are we dealing with these issues when they do arise, which I think is important. So what is vaping? So many of you, I'm sure, are very well familiar with what it is because you may have used it or tried it, or you have friends that do it. Others, like Paul, might have no idea, and that's okay too, and I'd prefer that, but no judgment here. So the difference between an e-cigarette or a vape device and a traditional cigarette is that it's a water-based vapor. So it is not an actual smoke. There is no tobacco within the liquid. It is an aerosol, which is consisting of multiple fine particulates and a variety of different compounds. It is not just water vapor with some flavoring, which is the common misconception amongst parents and youth, thinking, oh, I can just inhale this, which it's not being inhaled, it's an aerosol, and it's okay, it's just water. It's just like taking a hot steamy shower or sitting in a steam room. That is not the case. So we'll go into a little bit more depth, but generally speaking, a vape device consists of a mouthpiece, a battery, and a cartridge that contains the e-liquid or juice, and then a heating coil, which is powered by that battery. Multiple different brands exist, and you'll see later on in the presentation the issues that arise when you use different brands and put those together and what that can result in. So when the device heats up, the battery heats the heating component, and that turns the contents of the e-liquid into an aerosol. So these are a variety of vaping devices. Many of these are older. The newer ones are things like this. So this device looks very much obviously like a USB. We certainly in our school district have had these on desks with teachers present or in houses with parents present. And really, unless you've seen the device, you wouldn't know that it is any different than a typical USB. And that's why they're marketing them as such. Obviously, this makes them easy to use and hard for parents and administration alike to detect. So these are just a variety. These are one of the original, the older, appearing traditional cigarette, though it is an e-cigarette. You'll see the larger ones like this. Those cost more, so you don't see as many youth using them. But again, all of them really have the same structural components, which I said, is going to have a cartridge, a heating component, and then the actual chamber. This one, again, like I said, is older, so it's not quite as applicable. These are really the ones that you're going to start to see. So this is the Juul. There's a number of brands, but this is one of, well, by far the most common one you're going to see. And Juul does make a variety of different ones. So this isn't the only product that they make, but this is one of the most common ones. These being the pods and then this being the device, and it is rechargeable. So this is a Juul by PAX. Unlike most vaping devices on the market, it blurs the lines between cigarettes, vape pens, and the older, larger components. It's a USB pen-driven like design, and those cartridges or pods are what you purchase and what you refill with. So I just think these quotes are pretty interesting. The vapor product is easily in line with what you get from a much bigger, more complicated device, so the larger ones you saw. However, it's obviously minimized in its size and shape. This starter kit, which gives you the pods, the whole component, and a charger is $49.99. And to go online, you can purchase these. You do need the last four of a social security number and the birth date and name of the individual that is supposed to be. Now they're changing it to 21 and older. Previously, it was 18. So if your children or friends of children or older siblings give this information to your child, then they would have the ability to go ahead and purchase online. and that's just an interesting component or a fact that I found, that one Juul pod is approximately equivalent to one pack of cigarettes or 200 puffs. This is highly variable, and I'm going to show you a document that Minnesota Department of Health just came out with a couple days ago that can show some of these pods are actually upwards of 20 packs of cigarettes. So what you need to bear in mind is, though there is no tobacco product in these pods, there is a variable amount of nicotine present. So one of the common misconceptions is, oh, there's no nicotine, they are not addictive, they're just a flavored, profile. That's not true. You can certainly purchase liquids without nicotine, though even in those there's generally trace amounts. However, you can purchase any varying amount of nicotine containing e-liquids, which can be significantly more or similar to a traditional cigarette. On the products. So one of the big things, so now all of these components are under FDA regulation. That being said, it's really hard to regulate all of this, and it's very, very new and changing rapidly. So how well that's being administered and controlled, I don't know. That would be much more answers, expertise. That said, there are a number of vape shops that mix their own liquids. There's no way to correct. So you could get, certainly if you buy a prepackaged one, and if they are abiding by the regulations of the FDA, then it would list it. If, however, you go into a vape shop and you want your own liquids mixed and whatnot, then it can be any varying amount of nicotine. Also, one of the big things is purchasing these products online. There are a number of people who like bug juice, it's called, and I'm sure there's any number of other products that are similar to it where the nicotine levels are just exorbitantly high, so that you actually get a bit of a high from it. It's not as though you'd get a high like a marijuana or another, psychoactive drug, but you certainly get a very high up, if you will, from that very high. It's just like if any of you tried cigarettes for your first time as a kid, when all of a sudden you get that head buzz, and then, they're trying to achieve that, but frequently. So yes and no. So this is just a nicotine chart. I just think it's, pretty interesting. It shows you most traditional cigarettes are between 8 and 20 milligrams of nicotine. But you can see, a Juul pod can be 59 milligrams, although you can go to a store and have that mixed at a much higher or lower concentration. So it's just, there's a lot out there, and I think that's what people fail to recognize. I think that the gross misconception for a very long time was it's a water vapor that's flavored, it tastes good, and it's not that bad for me. And the reality is nicotine is one of the most highly addictive substances there are, and we'll see in just a few slides how nicotine adversely affects the adolescent and developing brain much more so than the adult. So the 10 most addictive drugs, a study was done by a gentleman in Harvard, and if you note, tobacco is number 3 on here, just second to cocaine and heroin, and that's because of the nicotine component. So that, includes a vape device, it includes an e-cigarette. These are all synonymous in terms of their addictive potential for all individuals, but especially for youth. For which one? So this is just showing you the variety. So a traditional cigarette, they're putting at 16 because it's 2 to 20. But you can see, you can buy the Juul pod, the starter kit that that I showed you. I didn't purchase. Was my grant doesn't pay for that. Was $49.99. That comes with the 59 milligram pod. However, all of these brands, if you go online, have a wide variety of the number of milligrams that you can purchase in terms of nicotine in that e-liquid. And then also, you have to bear in mind too, so everybody's ability to take a puff in is going to be different. So that needs to be considered. Another thing I think people fail to recognize is with a traditional cigarette, an individual will take a drag, put it down, take a drag, put it down. That's not the same thing with a vape device or an e-cigarette, right? So when you take the hit, you're taking the full hit in. It's not continuing to burn. So none of that nicotine, none of that vapor, that aerosol is burned off. So all of the nicotine, as long as you use the entire cartridge, which presumably you would, is all being, utilized by the bot or the person that's using it. That's not the same as a pack of cigarettes when, maybe a half or 3/4 or maybe even a quarter. It just depends on the smoker with a traditional cigarette where that is continuing to burn and that isn't actually being taken in. So there is a difference in considering those things. Just things to be cognizant of. It doesn't mean it's just things to be aware of. So these are the e-liquids, and I assume you'll probably notice pretty quickly that sour candy gummy bears and Fruit Loops and slushies, cotton candy in the back. Generally speaking, I'm just going out on a limb here, but generally speaking, I don't think these are geared at like the 60 and 50-year-old individuals who are longtime smokers who are trying to use this or justify using this as a cessation device. Clearly, they're marketing these liquids to youth because they know if you get somebody started early that they are going to be a longtime consumer. It makes sense from a consumer product standpoint. There's no doubt that these, however, are clearly going after the taste preferences of youth. I mean, without a doubt. So e-liquid is a vaporized product. It contains, so the major component of it is a glycol or vegetable glycerin. Obviously, as we just discussed, it often does contain nicotine. You can get it without, though most of those will even have trace amounts. You can have a varying amount, and the flavoring chemicals are obviously additive. So there are a variety of metals and toxic chemicals, including formaldehyde, which is extremely toxic. That's what we use to aid in deceased bodies, rather. Acrolein, lead, nitrosamines, which also are cancer-causing substances. So there's a variety of toxic chemicals. There was a very good study done by Harvard that showed a variety of all brands that stated they did not contain these chemicals, indeed did. But it is important to note there is no tobacco in any of these products. These chemicals individually have been found to be carcinogenic, as I said, so they're cancer-causing. However, you have to bear in mind that these products have not been around long enough to have long-term studies that can show a direct link between cancer and the product. And that took a long time with tobacco products or traditional tobacco products as well. So just things to be aware of. So I think this is an interesting conversation piece, and I think it's one that you really have to look at. Vaping as a cessation tool. So I'm just going to read this and then just a few more points to it. So electronic cigarettes, which includes vaping, were originally marketed as a cessation device for long-term smokers. However, neither the U.S. FDA or American Medical Association, nor the American Lung Institute, nor the American Cancer Institute. So not a single medical entity in this country has approved or recommended e-cigarette devices as a cessation tool. E-cigarettes might present an effective alternative to leaf tobacco for some smokers, but in clinical testing, larger population studies and full analysis of the ingredients and manufacturing processes need to be conducted before their safety, viability, and impacts can be determined as either clinical tools or as widely available effective alternatives to tobacco. Whether e-cigarettes can effectively help people quit smoking is unknown. But with their fruit and candy flavors, they have a clear potential to entice new smokers. And I think that's important. So there are arguments that would state there's fewer chemicals in a e-liquid than there is a traditional tobacco product or cigarette. I'm not dissuading you from that argument. I don't disagree. I do agree. In many of the e-liquids, there are fewer chemicals. That doesn't mean these are harmless substances. It doesn't mean they are not cancer-causing potentially. There are potentially fewer chemicals, but that does not automatically associate to a better outcome. Additionally, when we're talking about vaping and we're talking about these flavors, it's clear that we're talking about youth. Yes, there are some youth that started smoking at a very young age. However, the majority of individuals we are discussing are going to be 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. we're not talking about cessation. Our goal here is prevention oriented. So what can we do to prevent them from starting? So a cessation device, especially when we're talking about new policy changes like tobacco 21 and things like that, are not geared at cessation, which, as I just stated, this device is not considered in this country as such regardless. But, I think it's just important to know sort of where your stance is on that. We're not talking about this as trying to quit. If we want to have that conversation, we absolutely can. This is different. We're really talking about prevention measures and what we can do in our community to provide our youth with a with a healthy upbringing where we're not bombarding them with things that are enticing in terms of flavors that are actually really harmful. So that's that. So what are the adverse effects? This isn't, we're not here to scare you. It's just an educational, event. So what are the big ones? Neurodevelopment derangements, we'll go over that. Nicotine effects, highly addictive. And the dangers of accompanying substances within the aerosol, which we just talked about, those chemicals, lead, formaldehyde, acrolein, and a number of others. And then one of the big ones that is not often talked about, which I mentioned just a bit ago, is when you use different pieces or components to put together your vape device and they're not necessarily compatible. What happens then? And then finally, the use of these vape devices for additional products like recreational marijuana, THC, synthetic drugs, and the like. So these are all things that from our generation and era we didn't experience. We weren't exposed to. For us, you smoked pot either in a joint or a bong or something along those lines. It always came in the same substance. Today it's very different. THC is now found in oils, waxes, a variety of products that if you looked at it, you would have no idea first what you're looking at, let alone it being something that is a recreational drug and then subsequently being used in a device that your youth may already have in their possession. So one of the big things is the neurodevelopment. So regional brain development during adolescence occurs at varying times. This means that the limbic structures, which are really important in emotional processing and reward system maturation, occur at earlier stages. So that means they're developing emotionally and in terms of reward system. So, ooh, this feels good. I'm going to do more of that. Contrarily, the development of the frontal and prefrontal cortices, which are responsible for cognitive control over behavior, mature later, meaning reasoning through things. So if you're driven by something that feels good and you don't have as much cognitive ability as yet to reason through possible consequences or why that's, logically not a good choice, it makes sense that you're going to do more of something that feels good. And that's what you see. So adolescent behaviors are largely driven by a strong emotional reward system response as opposed to a strong cognitive self-control and adult decision-making strategy. Thus, compared to adults, adolescents are generally more readily motivated by reward, less averse to risk, which is something we see all the time, and more readily influenced by their peers. And all of these things make sense. We see this. We went through it. It makes sense. As a result, the brain is, well, not as a result rather, but in concert with that, the brain is also more sensitive and vulnerable to the reward effects of nicotine. So you actually get an upregulation of the receptors that make it feel good. So the details of this aren't particularly important, except that it means the brain in the adolescent that is developing is more sensitive, meaning it's more likely to have addictive potential at that point. So whereas an adult brain might start utilizing a nicotine product, they're not going to have the same upregulation and therefore the same drive to go back to that. And that's really important because if you have a stronger drive, you're more likely to do it again. And that predisposes us to future addiction potential and not just for nicotine. So it's really this feedback loop, and it's pretty serious and it's frightening. So nicotine exposure during adolescence is associated with deleterious effects on the development of the prefrontal cortex, meaning that there are associations between nicotine exposure and increased cognitive deficit and addiction later in life. And another thing it's also associated is with additional mental health issues. So those are just all things to be aware of. I think this one's pretty interesting. I can't imagine it happens very often, but there are studies that have shown that in adolescent brains, because you are more susceptible, you can actually lose autonomy over nicotine products within just 1 to 2 days of use. So whereas an adult brain, and this isn't going to be for every adolescent, but those adolescents who are particularly susceptible to future addiction potential, these people could use a product just once, twice, 3 times, and literally already have that drive to be addicted to it. In an adult brain, you wouldn't see it at that rate. Doesn't mean that somebody with an addiction potential wouldn't progress quickly, but certainly far less quickly than these brains that are developing. So these are more the systemic effects that you would see, and probably more the stuff that you would anticipate. So how does nicotine affect us? Well, you can see from the picture that it affects just about everything. It's not extremely important to go over all the specifics of every single organ system that can be affected, but some of the big things I think that are interesting is that nicotine exposure can lead to insulin resistance. We already have a big issue with type 2 diabetes in our country, in our communities, and so just being cognizant of that, I think, is really important. Additionally, of course, we expect heart rate and blood pressure alterations, so a lot of times you'll get hypertension and things from these products. But I think this is why, I think is the most important. Nicotine is highly addictive in its own right and may lead to changes in the brain that increase the risk of addiction to other drugs, especially those of young people. Nicotine may also impair the prefrontal brain development in adolescence, leading to attention deficit disorder and poor impulse control. So what's of interest is that we're seeing e-cigarette and vape use go up, which means we're going to potentially see a lot more of these issues, and that's frightening. And that also not only stresses the community and the family structure, but certainly some of the things that you're going to see at school. And if you consider, if you have ever been addicted to anything, whether it's coffee or otherwise, if you can't get your cup of coffee and you're sitting in a 7:30 a.m. meeting, that's not going to be any different than a 16-year-old kiddo who's addicted to their vape device in the middle of class, except that they have even less impulse control. So how much are we stressing, how much are they stressing their counterparts in class? How disruptive are they? So there's just, how much is there consequences? Are administrators being bombarded by these issues? So it just, these are things to just be aware of. They're happening, and they're there right now. So I think this is probably the biggest one that people bring up. If you haven't heard of it, it's called popcorn lung. So this is specifically associated with vape and aerosol devices. So interestingly enough, a decade ago, factory workers in a microwave popcorn factory were sickened by breathing diacetyl. It was a buttery flavored chemical in foods like popcorn. And while it's very tasty, it was linked to the deaths of many people, and it is a cause of bronchiolitis obliterans, which is a very serious and irreversible disease and damage to the smallest little components of the airways. So you actually lose the ability to expand and contract, and so that doesn't allow for air filling within the lung. So bronchiolitis obliterans results in scarring of the tiny airway sacs in the lungs, and then that results in thickening and narrowing. So you lose lung capacity. And then you're also very much predisposed to COPD and additional infections of the lungs, if you will. So these are diseases, but they predispose you to infections which can worsen the disease itself. And diacetyl, so I think this is pretty interesting. Based on a study carried out by Harvard University, 39 of the 51 e-cigarette brands contained this product. So even though you think you're inhaling a water vapor that's just flavored, even if it doesn't have nicotine, in reality, there's a strong potential that it contains a component like this, or one that hasn't even been appropriately studied yet, because these are really new products, and they're changing very rapidly. So there are going to be some gruesome pictures up in just a second, so if you don't like them, put your head down. They're not that bad, but they're thermal injuries. So like I said, these components have a mouthpiece, a battery, a combustible or heating coil. Sometimes, individuals will purchase a variety of different brands, and then they'll put these together. Additionally, sometimes one of the more popular things to do is to heat the coils extremely hot, so that you get a water vapor that goes away more quickly. You get a very much stronger hit of the nicotine and the flavor, but in doing so, you really predispose yourself to thermal injury. So there's a lithium-ion battery in many of these. That's often the cause of the thermal injury, but it can be from any number of, heating it too rapidly, heating it too high, putting devices together that are not compatible. So these are some of the injuries that you can see and have seen. So this is a component that is combusted because they were not compatible. This gentleman had a e-cigarette in his leg, and the lithium-ion battery burnt him, and this gentleman was actually using his device when it combusted in his face. So I am close friends with a trauma surgeon at HCMC, and these injuries are not extremely predominant, and they're not coming in the door every day, but they're not that rare either. They are happening, and usually people just put something together and they didn't think it was a big deal. So if you are using it, which we advise you don't, but if you are using a vape device, please at least talk with or if your children are, please talk with them about if they are using it, use it safely. Use components that are compatible, use it at a rate or a temperature that is appropriate. Not everybody is going to be completely absent from these products, so at least have a conversation with them about these types of things, because they happen, and God forbid that becomes your face or your leg, So the last sort of injury-related thing I want to talk about in terms of vape devices are the addiction potential. And for me, being in chemical health, this is really one of the things that I am most concerned about. I know that exposure to youth, with nicotine is really often a conduit to further products. It doesn't mean that the drug itself or the component itself is a gateway, but it does, like we said, it does alter that brain chemistry and really does predispose individuals who have that seeking desire, who have that addiction potential, to really progress up rather rapidly. So one of the most common things that these devices are utilized for is for marijuana. So in many of the states where marijuana has become legal recreationally, products have obviously changed rapidly. So you're not seeing traditional marijuana products often. You're seeing gummy bears, you're seeing candies, you're seeing things like that. But really you're seeing a lot of these oils and waxes, and these components can be put into your vape device and smoked. And so out of the 2017 Minnesota student survey data on tobacco, so this is really quite recently, they looked at individuals who are currently using e-cigarettes, if they've ever used an e-cigarette, and then if they've never used one, and their use of marijuana with these devices. So you see that what you would anticipate is that somebody who is using an e-cigarette is also much more likely to be using that device for marijuana as well. So if you can read on the bottom, I know it's very small print, more than 1 in 10 high school students, which is 11.5%, reported that they had ever used an e-cigarette device to vaporize marijuana, THC, or hash oil, or hash wax, THC wax. About 1 in 3, that's 1 in 3 current e-cigarette users had ever used that device to vape marijuana or THC, oil, or wax. So this isn't a small percentage. It's something to be aware of. It's happening. The products that are available to our youth and our colleagues is very different than it used to be. So again, this is why a lot of community events and questions have come up, because for the first time in 17 years, so the first time since it was administered, we've seen an increase in youth smoking, and that was concerning and is very concerning. Clearway, Minnesota, Association for Non-Smokers, Minnesota have all done a lot of work to diminish smoking in our communities amongst our youth and have done a really fabulous job, as you've seen. But then we have a pretty striking increase since 2014 when they introduced e-cigarettes to the market and to the survey. It should be noted the first, I think, ever e-cigarette device that was brought to the market in the USA was only in 2004. So it hasn't been around for a very long time. And this just highlights, so they added e-cigarettes in 2014 onto this survey, and you can see just within the 3 years how drastically that is increasing, while everything else, I mean, traditional cigarettes are less than 10%, smokeless tobacco less than 6%. So it's pretty concerning. And that's for 30-day use. And then this highlights Hennepin County. So this data, it was done at the state level, and they do not break it down into individual school districts. This year actually, 2019, every 3 years, Minnesota offers a student state survey data. It's up to your district superintendent whether or not your district will choose to allow students to participate in that. That does come down and break down to the school level then, and by grade levels and gender. However, this data is not as specific, but it does break it down to the county level, and you can see amongst 9th graders and amongst 11th graders that nearly 20% of individuals are using these products. So statewide, which we're over the average in Hennepin County, statewide over 17% of 11th graders used e-cigarettes, while only 8.4 used traditional cigarettes and 5.1 smokeless tobacco. So it really is an e-cigarette vape device issue. So I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly. These are just the issues that you can see that arise for youth in our community. So school suspensions, vaping devices are considered by the FDA tobacco products. So anything that was previously described or warranted as a tobacco product, this is now part of that. So any violation, getting caught in the community, et cetera, is a violation of the state high school league policies. So if you're in sports, drama, athletics, things like that, it would pertain to those rules and regulations. I'm not going to go over that because we'll let you talk about that. But these are the State Athletic Association, requirements for consequence. So 1 to 3 days, 3 to 5, 6 to 10. Now this is all within the school setting. I'm going to go over, Kristen. So just some interesting slides. These are all for vapes. If you notice, they're very similar to what we saw in the 1930s and then 2011. So it's just very interesting. They're literally doing nearly the same thing. So these are flavors for the liquids. It's just, they really didn't have to reinvent the wheel. So these are the slides that Kristen from Answer would have gone over. I'm not going to give you a lot of the background other than to say, these this is clear waste. So Minnesota cities and countries that prohibit the use of e-cigarettes in all indoor places. So we're doing a good job. We're increasing, but we've got a long ways to go. I guess we don't have it. I think one of the important things to note is that St. Louis Park was amongst one of the first communities that passed regulations. So your first regulation that you actually passed was, let me get to it, on flavored tobacco products. This is a statewide map, or excuse me, a countrywide map. And then Minnesota, which we're growing now. We've now got 13. But this is the first regulation or ordinance change that you guys did here in St. Louis Park, and that was back in December of 2017. So Edina was the first to actually pass Tobacco 21, but I believe St. Louis Park was the first to actually pass all 3 ordinances. So the first was banning flavored tobacco product sales in St. Louis Park, which, as we talked about, it's obvious that the flavor profiles were geared at our youth. So those can no longer be sold in St. Louis Park. And you can read the fine print, but essentially it just limits, as you can see here, prohibits flavors. I guess I don't know that it really requires any further explanation. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that candied chocolate, bubble gum, and fruit flavors would be a part of that. And it also includes, I believe you guys also, yes, you included menthol and wintergreen. Oh, you did not. So menthol and wintergreen flavors were exempt from that. So some cities have included that. Looks like St. Louis Park chose to remove that, which a lot of smokers would say that if they're lifelong smokers, to limit the menthol and wintergreen flavors would not be fair. So it's something that some cities have done. So the first thing you guys did as a community, which was really great, was limiting those sales of flavored products. The second thing, and really I think for me personally, the most important was increasing that age of sale. So St. Louis Park changed an ordinance that raised the legal age of purchase of any and all tobacco products from 18 to 21 years of age. And so it's important to know, I think there's a lot of misconception about what that means. This is at the retail level. So our goal is never to cause any additional issue for youth and law enforcement. Our law enforcement is doing a really great job. And most of our retailers are doing a really great job too in abiding by the rules and regulations that the city sets out for them. Our goal, however, as advocates is not to have a youth get a record, be fined criminally, etc., because they used a tobacco product. We want you to have a full, wonderful life. We don't want you to have limitations to getting into college because you have a record, or your ability to apply for financial aid, because if you have a drug-related offense, you cannot qualify. That is not the goal. So the goal is to prohibit so that we can provide a more protective environment for our youth. And so this really falls on the level of the retailer. So a retailer would be fined, not the individual, if caught under the age of 21. So it is now illegal under city ordinance in St. Louis Park to purchase any product unless you are 21 years of age or older. The 13th city in Minnesota just passed this same ordinance, and that was in Excelsior in September, so last month. So there is a growing group of cities that are doing this. Edina, Minnetonka, Plymouth, Excelsior, Minneapolis. So I think this is really great. Obviously, flavored products is really important too, but by doing a tobacco 21, you really encompass all those issues, because if you're not 21, you can't buy the product regardless. So there's a lot more detail to that Kristen would go over. If you guys have questions about the specific ordinances, I have her contact information. But that's really the gist of it. We have a lot of questions about, so shouldn't somebody be able to purchase these products if they're 18 years of older? One of the big things, especially for military personnel, one of the big questions is always that when we're trying to pass these ordinances. Hawaii was one state that actually changed this at the statewide level, and on their bases, they were given the ability to opt out, and the administrators on the base said, absolutely not, we want to opt in. Why would we award our young adults, our young men who we want strong and healthy to come back to a product that's going to kill them? And so I think that really just sort of prefaces that, nobody's trying to get upset or angry if you have a smoke or you have a single cigarette or cigar or something. The goal is to really produce a healthier lifestyle, and to do whatever we can to prevent and to really accelerate that. So that's one of the common questions, but there's a number of other ones. I think that and the retailers, most retailers, it's only 2 to 4% of their actual sales. So changing the market from 18 to 21 is not going to significantly adversely affect them. Doesn't mean it won't affect them. We are very cognizant and supportive and compassionate towards that. However, our goal is a safe, healthy community. So if 2% needs to be affected out of your gross sales, perhaps you should think about selling another product that's not so harmful. Sorry. So I think that's probably the majority of what I've got for you guys. Yeah. So these are a couple of the other areas that have passed it. I guess one of the big things to comment on too is that misconception that vaping isn't harmful. So why not let somebody do it? And we see that, and that is a conversation that we have with some parents. And so while the majority of youth under the age of 18 and now under the age of 21 get these products from older individuals, there are certainly a number of families and parents who actually purchase these products for their children, thinking that they are better, or they're not unhealthy, so they're a decent, not even alternative, just a decent product. And so I think just having more information and more education about that is extremely important. Some people will ask, well, why target the age of 21? Is it because we chose alcohol is that the big thing is that if you're looking at 16, 7, or even 15, 16, 17-year-olds, the likelihood of a 15, 16, or 17-year-old being around somebody that is 21 years of age or older is much less likely than somebody who's 18 years of age and who's a senior in their class or works with them, at the mall store, or the convenience store, or restaurant that they work at. And so having that age gap actually does make a very significant difference in what their ability to get these products are. So I think those are really important things to address. One thing I would say is that talking to your youth is really important. With these flavors, you're not going to know what it smells like. So if it says bubblegum, it doesn't just taste like bubblegum, it smells like bubblegum. Especially for individuals with female daughters who might use like spritzers, sprayers, things like that, scented lotions, you truly won't know the difference of those smells. These don't taste like a traditional cigarette. They don't taste like marijuana, or smell like marijuana when they're putting a wax or an oil or THC, what have you, in these devices. So recognizing that you're not going to have the ability like your parents did, to walk in your room and know, oh, you were smoking tonight. You don't have that same luxury. And so I think you have to be willing, but if you're willing to have an open and candid conversation with your youth, I think it's really important. That being said, you have to be willing to actually listen to the answers that your youth are going to provide. And those are oftentimes not answers you necessarily want to hear. We've done a number of focus groups with adolescents, and they've been very candid about, yeah, all my friends do it. We do it in the car, in the parking lot when we're leaving school or coming to school. Jewel makes a sweatshirt with the drawstring that has a vape device in it, so in class you can just grab it. Like I said, we can be honest in that there's certainly times when that Jewel pod is used in the class, put down, a single vapor hit is taken, and then put back on the desk and is not recognized as anything but a USB. Is it happening in the bathrooms at school? Yes. I mean, it's happening everywhere. It's happening in your home too if your students or youth are using it. There's not a place or a person that's inept from using these products if they want to, because they're very easily concealable. That said, I'm not trying to scare you, and I'm not telling you it's happening 24/7 around the clock. No, but these are issues, and they're new products, and they're changing very, very rapidly. And so it's hard to know what things look like, what things smell like, what to look out for. And so I think conversations are really important, and asking questions and being willing to talk about why you're concerned. And the age-old just don't do it because I did it or something along those lines generally isn't super productive. So you might want to, be a little more open-minded than that. But I think that's the majority of what I have. We've got a number of resources. If you're concerned, and I'm sure you guys can elaborate on more for St. Louis Park too, but these are some of the ones that we recommend. Traverse Counseling is actually in St. Louis Park. They're a great facility. Relate Counseling, Pediatrics, and then there's just a number of other documents. But I do want to show you just one thing, if I can pull it up, that was just released. So this was put up by the Minnesota Department of Health, and it's just a PDF of sort of what you should be concerned about, what they are. It really goes over most of what we just went over, but I think this is particularly important. It just came out a couple of days ago, so October 8th, 2 weeks ago. So they actually put a full health advisory out about vaping devices because of how nicotine is priming and changing the adolescent brain, and how it really increases the likelihood of addiction potential in those individuals who are already predisposed. So it just came out. I think it's very interesting. It's pretty informative. So if you would like that, I'm more than happy to send that your way. You can also obviously find it online, but it gives you some additional ideas for what you can do, and if you're concerned, where to go for help. So I guess I will turn it over to you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have it on my, well, not these exact slides, but yeah, absolutely. I have it on our website already, and I'm happy to email it out, and if you want to disperse it, or I can individually email it to you if you want to provide me your email address. And I can pull up my email address if you want to just send me an email, I can respond back with it.
All right, so we're just going to share a little bit of stuff that we see at the high school. And then if you have questions, we can answer those or try to answer those as well. What Kim was saying about the mental health piece, I think is really important. I think it's kind of at the bottom like kind of very underneath of everything, and with the teen brain development and things like that. The students that I work with, as a chemical health specialist, it kind of covers a big range of things. But when students are talking specifically about vaping, some of the things that are affecting them in school would be the taking their attention away. So they are addicted to the nicotine, and at least the students that I've talked with are very uninformed of the health risks that are with it. It's very much under this assumption that it's not as bad as cigarettes, and of course there's some things that's definitely not as detectable as cigarettes, and it probably tastes better. And I've had a couple share with me what it's like to vape for the first time. I have not done that. I had the opportunity when I was in college to smoke cigarettes for a little bit, and so I know what that feels like. But they'll talk about the burning sensation that they get on their first few inhales, and they'll talk about kind of the rush that they get, and then they're always looking for that. And so if they're in second hour and they're not really super interested in what's being taught, and they are feeling like they need a hit of nicotine, that's what their focus is. And so they're going to, and it might be that they have something with them. It might be, and they want to go use it. It might be that they're trying to figure out how they're going to do it after school, or how, they might do it during the day. And so that, varies from student to student and what they're willing to do at school. But it is, addicting. And so I think that is important to know. I also think, working with them, when I work with students, it's always trying to figure out kind of where they're at, how they're feeling about themselves emotionally, kind of assessing mental health at the same time, because it is a coping mechanism for some things. And there a lot of times, or I would say every student I meet with there's, regardless of the substance, there are things underneath like anxiety, depression, things that haven't been maybe even identified, or certainly haven't been addressed or aren't being addressed enough where it's helpful. And so then working together with the student, and then if I'm able to work with the family, students are covered by Minnesota statute and what they can share with me, and I'm limited in what I can share with parents and other adults. And that's for their protection, to be able to ask for help without having the consequence of, maybe getting in trouble on top of it. And also other school personnel. And then you mentioned, some of the agencies in the community that do therapy and counseling-based services, and really working with them to try to get those supports so they can work towards healthier coping mechanisms, because it's the same just for all of us when we were having our brains were developing when we were in high school, and it's the same, pressures and anxieties and things. And I would say now in today's world, I'm just gonna, just segue a little bit here for screen time. There's just challenges that we didn't have to, or that my generations before me, it wasn't part of our social structure. So, understanding that and really seeing it as from a point of getting them the help that they need where they need it. And sometimes they don't even realize that it is coming from a mental health perspective. And then they start talking, and it's, there's, tears and emotion and a lot of stress behind it. So I think it's important to kind of go from it from that perspective.
So I would definitely second a lot of what Kristen said. We see it most often as a symptom of something else. Vaping is extremely hard to detect. I am 6 months pregnant and have a really good nose at this point. And it is virtually impossible to smell the difference between a vape pen or soap, or a vape pen or perfume. So we really struggle with catching vaping. I definitely spend a lot of time doing my hair in bathrooms to be present in bathroom situations. And I know that my staff works really hard to be in the bathroom, but we're not there throughout the day. It's not something that we are oblivious to, but it's also not something that we can really easily catch. So that is where that conversation piece comes in. It is amazing to me, and not really because I've been doing this for a while, but how honest and truthful students are about what's going on with them. And really it is just that ability to say, hey, are you doing this? And for the most part, they're very upfront about, yep, that's what I'm doing. There is the occasion where in the last, I think we're on week 7, we've found 2 pieces of vape pens, not even the entire pens, but pieces, but not because we were looking for vaping or because that was an issue, but because we were looking for something else. And so there again, it is the symptom of something else going on with the student, where that is a conversation that we have with Kristen or one of our other social workers or counselors to address what the bigger issue is. We don't see vaping as the big picture. It's usually there's something else going on behind the scenes that is resulting in poor choices in other directions. So I have heard, I have really great sources, lots of teenagers, that it is replacing cigarettes for them, that they don't see their friends smoking cigarettes as often because they're vaping. So it's almost, and according to my great sources of students, it's almost like a 1-to-1 replacement. But, while it's less chemicals, it's still not what we're looking for either. And that is the struggle.
One of the big things is that we communally have really accepted vaping. So we were discussing this before, but traditional cigarette smoking has really been pushed to the outskirts of our community. I mean, there's not facilities that you can smoke in anymore. Most residential housing, even if you're renting, is non-smoking. And really, most youth, and we have data on this, it's 2016, so it's a bit old, but they'll tell you, no, my friends don't smoke. I don't smoke. And most of them regard it in a very negative light. That said, we've now socially accepted vaping, especially amongst our adolescents, because it's a product that's new to them, right? I mean, it wasn't in our generations, and so it's not really as applicable. But it's acceptable. So it's socially acceptable to go to a party and vape, or sit in a car before school and vape, or hit, a little pot in the bathroom. And I think for a lot of kids, it initially starts off as cool, but for kids who have mental health issues, especially anxiety, or kids who have ADHD and can't sit still or have a hard time focusing, or for kids who are depressed, or for kids who have addiction potential, this becomes very quickly a true tool and coping mechanism for them that then predisposes them to a number of other issues, moving forward. Yeah.
So what is there as far as resources for helping kids who feel like they want to stop vaping, but they're addicted? So my son is a freshman and he's in high school. He's saying something to a boy one day about, you stop doing that. And he said, I've tried and I'm addicted, I'm helping out. So I know we talked about vaping ourselves about how to find it, but what are there now for resources to help? I think back to like my early days when I was doing probation, thinking about like the tobacco cessation classes
Yep.
that kids caught, with traditional smoking.
I'll let them, describe what you have here in St. Louis Park. But generally speaking, so Stop the Start has really great resources. And there's a number of other, Quit Plan also have really, really great free resources. That said, schools also have a number of resources for their youth. So Quit, yeah. So any of those, certainly. Also talking to your local pediatricians. So whoever you're utilizing might have some really great resources for your youth, because this is a nicotine addiction, and potentially something much greater like a mental health issue. I know at Minnetonka Public Schools we have our chemical health counselors. So in those instances, we have them available for these youth, and we have absolutely utilized, that person. I'll let you explain what you guys do here, but that is always available to our youth, and certainly provides them a variety of ways to quit or get resources. There are actually apps online that kids can or anybody can use. It's not like it's specific to a child, but there are apps, there are quit plans, there are a variety of things out there. Many of them we have listed on our website, but if you were to go to Traverse Counseling or Relate and talk, I'm gonna let them take over for St. Louis Park because every community is a little bit different.
A lot of them are. A vast majority of them are. Right, absolutely. And, yeah, no, I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but as my understanding and working with our chemical health advisor, that wouldn't be something that they would need to speak with them about. That would be information that was, private. And then we have had apps, we have had a variety of components that were free to them of charge. It wasn't, it's all covered under Rule 25 or whatever else.
It's tricky, especially the younger they are, the harder it is for them to go out in the community and access their own resources if they're not having help, by a parent, or if it's something that isn't free and it requires insurance, because then parents find out from on the other side of things. And so if he could be encouraged maybe to talk to someone at school, a school social worker, or if they have a chemical health specialist in that high school, or someone who works on the mental health piece, will be familiar with what's protected, where he can disclose, your son's friend could disclose that information, and talk about wanting to quit and have a safe space to be able to do that, and they can work together from there, which is kind of what I do at the high school. So students, are referred to me sometimes by a concerned parent who thinks that their child may be using, and that includes vaping. Sometimes it is an administrator or school staff. Sometimes students seek me out themselves, and sometimes students will refer a friend. And so that's kind of how I get to know students, and then we kind of go from there. And so like I said, it gets kind of tricky with community resources with their age and being able to get to different places for help. All of the things that you had mentioned. What I do for example, with a student who is not ready to share with parents, and so we're kind of limited. We work on, with me, work on coping mechanisms and different things like that. And that can look anywhere from, using apps, which you mentioned, which, anytime you can tie in technology and stuff, is helpful. But, sometimes it's just really looking at, we were talking about brain development and the prefrontal cortex and not putting a lot of thought into future and things like that, because we're doing the here and right now, but really kind of being like, where does this affect you down the line? If you're an athlete and you're wanting to get a scholarship for college, this is probably not going to help you, and working like that, and then putting healthier things in place. Sometimes it means really looking at the friends that you spend a lot of time with, and are they making, choices, that you want. One thing that we didn't touch on that has come up for me, a number of times is, where do they get their stuff from? Well, if there's not an older person who's giving it to them, or they don't have the way online to have someone's social security number that's been passed around, the last 4 digits in a birthday, they can steal it. I mean, it sounds awful to say, but if you've got a group of kids that goes into a store that sells it, and they've know to distract and get behind the counter and take it. So now you've opened up a whole nother set of factors that could be, yeah. And so, or, if a family member thinks, well, I'd rather have my kid vaping than smoking real cigarettes, now you've got the person they look up to the most that doesn't really see it as an addiction, and really just kind of wanting that help. And so I would say for that young man, if he feels comfortable going to a school staff is a good place is a good place to start, and then they can help him navigate.
One of the things we do at our school that Tonka Cares does is we actually have these things called toilet tribunes. So we on the back of stalls, so that it's anonymous, we'll put like QR codes and things like that for stop programs or for information on vaping. We do it for mental health issues, for alcohol, marijuana. So we do it for all. It changes every 4 weeks. But I think it's one of the ways that's just really great for kids to get access to resources, but without standing in front of something while everybody else looks at them. It's just that anonymity of, having, because it's scary and it's uncomfortable. And, even if vaping is cool, like, then you don't want to be the kid that's not cool by stopping vaping. Or, so it's complex, but I just think if you can provide those resources in a way that's a little bit more anonymous, it's important. On our website too, we have like a youth-specific page where, hey, if you're, doing any sorts of drugs or have any sorts of mental health issues, here's a list of things that you can go to anonymously. So I think that's really important.
That's a good question. I'm going to hand it to an administrator.
I would say the biggest tool that we have in our toolbox is the same tool that kids are using to start smoking, and that's peer pressure. We do have the conversation with our students about, like, what are your friends doing? And do you think that this looks cool? And, even like when a bathroom gets locked because there was vaping in the bathroom or vandalism in a bathroom, that impacts a whole lot more than one person. And so using that peer pressure of this impacts all of us, and how is this impacting you as an individual, but also how does this impact your friend group? And so continuing to have that conversation with kids, and they're our best sources and our best allies in that. The fact that your son was able to have that conversation with his friend is our starting point a lot of times. The anonymous tips that we get about what's going on in school is usually the answer to a lot of our issues, because kids, they want to do good, and they want their friends to be healthy and happy, and so they will report. Even the kid who says, I'm not going to snitch, will snitch. Absolutely. It just takes that relationship with kids, and they then become our best allies and operatives. where there's a will, there's a way. But I think the fact that we are present, the fact that I, do my hair pretty regularly, is really making a big impact. And we do make those circulations through the bathroom pretty regularly. And just that presence is a deterrent. We also do a lot of things with passes, and just monitoring who's going to the bathroom, when people are going to the bathroom, if you're going to the bathroom every hour, if you're going to the bathroom 3 times in an hour. Just some of those trends are things that we can track as a staff, as a collaborative team. And then students are also social. So a lot of the things that we're seeing going on in the bathroom, not just vaping, but even just students messing around in the bathroom. I don't know why. It's a cool place to hang out. It grosses me out. But a lot of times the bad stuff happening in the bathroom doesn't happen if there's only one person in there. So if we can monitor how many kids are going to the bathroom at one time, that really does decrease the number of things that go down in a bathroom.
I know they've tried to train or educate to like our paras and other people who are constantly in those spaces. I know for some time there was a rumor at Minnetonka that there was one particular bathroom that was really problematic. In reality, and I'm not employed by the district, so I'm just giving you my account from what I have heard from administration. That wasn't the case. It was really just a big kids got excited about the idea of that, and so it was just something that went around. But I think, just as you say, if you can monitor as best we can and just be aware of it and then minimize and how often, that seems to be.
There's definitely rumors of like the bathroom to vape in. It's, yeah, I haven't seen it to be true. So, it really is. But I also think like that first week of school, I think we had like a wow flair, and then it became less cool. And it was like, oh yeah, well, that's stupid. I'm not doing that anymore. Okay, well, great. So there is a certain cool factor to it too, that it loses its allure at some point. I definitely see our seniors are kind of phasing out of like that cool factor of vaping, or even doing goofy stuff in high school. Like they're starting to get ready to go to college, and they're not doing the silly stuff that our junior class is doing. And it's just the developmental trends of teenagers as well. Our freshmen still have that fear factor of I'm a freshman in a really big pond. And it changes over time, but it really is that communication piece with kids.
And there's still many that don't ever try it.
Yeah.
So I think that's important too. But
Yeah.
they're not all doing it.
We don't want to. It's certainly not here to scare anybody. It's just I think there's a very big lack of awareness, and it's such a new product. So when you talk about drinking alcohol or smoking marijuana, things like that, those are just age-old things that have constantly sort of had this ebb and flow as you have gone through adolescence. Because it's such a new product that I think a lot of people just don't know about it. They don't know what to know about it.
I think though for many of us it was something that everyone was doing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I talked about
I think it's excellent that you're having the conversation with your son at home. I think that that's, you know, you talked a little bit about kind of the conversations and things, and I would open it up to for anyone that has middle school students and even 4th and 5th graders to, you know, when we start talking about, you know, don't drink, don't use drugs, those kind of things. Most little kids, I'm a parent of a 7.5-year-old, think smoking cigarettes is disgusting, right? Because of the smell and that kind of thing. But when you've got, you know, 4th and 5th graders, 6th graders at a park, and there's older kids or older siblings, and things taste like gummy bears, and they want to be part of what's going on, they need to know, too, that that's not, you know, they need to be educated as well. And I'm not sure what they cover in DARE, I think in 4th grade. But okay, that's a problem. Good.
A lot of our health classes have not had components of e-cigarettes either, just because textbooks are not made every 3 years, and this really has just been such a revolutionary thing. So one of the things we've done is really take it upon ourselves to ask, especially middle school health teachers, because we know that's where they're being introduced to it for the first time. You know, what are you talking about? For how long are you talking about it? I'm not saying give them 45 lessons of e-cigarettes. They don't need to know all that. But are we discussing it? Is it on the table? You know, is it being brought up? And I think that's one of the biggest things, and why we're doing events like this, is that there's just a complete lack of awareness. And so all of our youth know all about it. We're sitting in the shadows, you know, running to catch up. So I think that's a really valid point.
It's good because it's kind of like where do we want them to find their information from? The kids on the bus, or from an adult who understands? And so I'm glad that DARE is looking into that. That's very important. Yeah.
I mean, historically, I think at some points it was used. Currently, we do not partake in drugs or
We heard the opposite. It's interesting to just hear
Unless they
the
just
rumors.
changed it.
It's a very like, ooh, I heard that Minnetonka's doing this, and just in our world. But
Which is fine. I don't believe so. We do have a police liaison at our high school that their full-time position is there. It's a 4-year position, but we haven't hired.
we do. Uh, nope. So it's a lot of common spaces. We check all of the locker rooms, bathrooms, common spaces that students are in, parking lots. We kind of a variety. We mix it up just to keep it fresh. It is not something that, you know, the dogs are not sicked on anybody, or you know, the dogs smell, and then it's addressed by a human. So
Maybe they're doing it possibly.
yeah.
Well, I was in a conversation, I'm part of the event that I have to do the event as part of the conversation. I said, why don't we do it? Yeah.
So I think every district kind of has their own policy on it. I do believe that all districts are doing it in some way, shape, or form, and it just is different. It looks different in different places. I think it's evolved over time in St. Louis Park. This is my first year in St. Louis Park. I came from Minneapolis. I know we used them in Minneapolis, and had been for a long time. So but it is also something that if it becomes habit, then it's not effective. So, you know, it's something that we use sparingly, but attempt to be effective.
The
I did learn that our drug dog team, shared that in a vape pen, if the gel doesn't move, that's the sign that it's marijuana versus vape liquid. So if the gel, like if you tip it like a bottle of water, if you tip it one way and then tip it the other way, if the gel doesn't move, it has THC in it.
That's a liquid ones can also have THC because it's a wax then, which the vape liquids don't come in the wax,
Yep.
but doesn't mean that it's still.
Yeah.
It's just an assured thing if it is.
Yep. If it's heated, then you can't tell as well. Things that we learn as, yeah.
I think that the thing is, products are just changing so rapidly today that, the one thing I'll just share with you is that when we did this community event in Minnetonka last spring, we were fortunate enough to have a mother and her daughter come, and they were in the audience. Oh, sorry. They were in the audience, and she was an 8th grader, and she explained to us that she was already addicted. She was very, very open and honest, and it was a really telling experience for all of us. She had been caught 15 times with a variety of vape or e-liquid devices, and she was a smart girl. She would get Target gift cards for Christmas or her birthday. She would then go to Target, exchange those for a Visa or MasterCard specific gift card, so not a store gift card. She would then go online. She had already taken a picture of her mother's, I think ID, or else her mother's credit card for when she didn't have a gift card, and then had those specific numbers. She would order whatever product she wanted online and then would have them shipped to her neighbor's house because she didn't want them coming back to her own home. Her neighbors didn't know that, so she would track the packages, and then just every day that she would go home from school would check her neighbor's front door because she knew they would be out at work. And it, I think it's just that idea that like they have so many more resources to utilize and get these products. And she wasn't a bad kid, she had good grades, but she had become addicted. She had some anxiety disorders, and when she started using it regularly, she felt like she really needed it. So then she went to exorbitant measures to get it. And she talked about stealing. So I think that's a big, important one. Like somebody who didn't steal and wouldn't steal, but just like any other individual suffering with addiction, you succumb to behaviors you otherwise would not do. And so just things to be aware of, because this is a chemical that changes your brain chemistry, not dissimilar to anything else. And using it at such a young age really does have the ability to predispose you to a lot of things that you may have otherwise avoided. So that being said, we're not here to try to scare you. Not everybody's doing it. A lot of people are avoiding it, but I think it is more prevalent than a lot of other chemicals and substances that we've seen in the past.
Is there anything going on federally or statewide in terms of regulation?
So not at the federal level as far as I know. That being said, I couldn't be certain. At the state level, yes. So we brought it, not we, they. A group of individuals brought it to the state level last year, but it was not brought up. So it was stated that it would be in contention this year. I think now that we've gotten such a strong level of support from the Metro, having Minneapolis, Edina, St. Louis Park, Plymouth, Minnetonka, Excelsior, and then a couple of other places, I think that's really going to showcase to legislators how serious we are as a community. I mean, you're talking about really the largest cities in the area. Interestingly enough, St. Cloud also passed Tobacco 21. However, the mayor vetoed it and would not allow it to pass. So, the most common issues we have with city councils when looking at these types of things is, we don't want a piecemeal or piecewise, type of legislation in our communities because then they can just go to another community. They can. We found that actually that hasn't really been the case. Most people just, especially youth, are not really willing to go that much further to go get something. They will at times, certainly, but that really hasn't been the case. And so overall, it's been pretty well received in the community, well received by law enforcement and the like. And so I do think that at the state level, we're probably looking at it this year or next. And there are other states in the country that have already done it, a number of them. So
We would not be the first. A number of them, I have the slide somewhere, but Hawaii, New Jersey, I think there's 8 states that have passed it already at the statewide level. So Utah, some other places.
That is a good question.
I think it's because it's moving so fast, and I am getting training on a week-to-week basis. That training just isn't possible to share so quickly. I know that we all have the same source though in front of us, and we definitely all hear it from our kids. Yeah, the images are shared. But even, like the gel, that is really hard to explain in an email. But it is something that we share generally. But it is, even from like the flash drive to, I didn't know about the sweatshirt. So, it is, the technology is faster than we were moving, to be honest.
Send out information from time to time, not on vaping, and then on also other things as well. And so, but it's a good question, and it's something that does need to be addressed. So we'll have to figure out a way to get it in there. So.
It has it in the dress, and yeah, pretty remarkable. So that way in class they can just, oh, here it is right here. So as you can see, the end of it is actually usually. I don't know if that one's homemade or not, but that's what the actual one looks like.
Used to be earbuds and now
Exactly.
Yeah.